and thank you for joining us for our seminar, Observing Changes in Loved Ones. We're really excited to have you here with us, and I am delighted to introduce our panelists this evening, who really know a ton about this topic and can all speak from really in-depth personal experience. The holidays can be a time where changes in the health of loved ones can become especially apparent, and our speakers tonight are going to walk us through the steps of identifying what changes and issues are things that we might really want to take careful note of, and then what to do once we see those changes so that you can help yourselves and your families develop a comprehensive plan for moving forward. So tonight we have three speakers. Mandy Delp will be our first speaker, who has over 12 years of experience at the Montgomery County Office of Aging. As she worked there as a geriatric assessor, a care manager, and a protective services investigator. Following that, she also had experience working in a continuing care community as the director of social services. And she currently works for Home Helpers, which is an agency dedicated to helping families transition to care, whether they're providing, especially for care in homes to seniors. And their services they provide include personal care, companion care, supervision, and help with household tasks and transportation. Most importantly, Mandy is just very energetic and passionate about helping others and a delight to interact with. We're also going to hear from Dennis Mahoney, who has a lot of experience on the financial and healthcare management side of things. A lot of his experience was in sales management and selling and managed care settings. So he knows all the secrets about navigating those systems. And he currently works for IKOR of Pennsylvania. And he works in their life care management services industry. And so they do a lot of things where they provide medical and financial support for seniors. And I'm very excited to hear what he has to say about protecting seniors from financial exploitation. Finally, we'll hear from Dianne Magee, who worked for almost 20 years as the solicitor for the Bucks County Area on Agency, and also did a clerkship in the Bucks County Orphans Court Division. Dianne brings so much experience and insight to her knowledge and the information she'll be sharing with us tonight, and will be presenting about a number of resources that I know you're going to want to stick around to hear more about. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Mandy Delp.
And that is a beautiful, wonderful, exceptional introduction, but unfortunately the host has me blocked out on video. So tra-la-la-la, and hopefully somebody can give me video access. I cannot start my own video.
All right. We do have someone working behind the scenes. There she is. Ta-da.
Here I am. Thank you guys so much. We had to assume that, would it really be a webinar without a little bit of a technological hiccup? Thank you again for that warm and welcoming introduction. Again, I'm Mandy Delp. I took a different approach to noticing changes in your loved ones. How about when you were headed out to go visit Aunt Sharon, and it was the holiday season, you walked in and perhaps her apartment felt incredibly chilly. The temperature had dropped. You'd peek over, her thermostat is at a mere 61 degrees. By the converse, maybe you go to visit Aunt Sharon in June and you notice that the thermostat is registering at 82 and she has a sweater on. Her apartment has a rather stale odor. You immediately look around and you see that there's some trash collected in the front doorway. Dishes are piled up and crumbs are littering the kitchen counters. What the heck? It has really only been 2 months since you saw her last. What is going on? Immediately, we blame ourselves. But it was COVID and I couldn't, and I had all these other agendas that I had to do, and I had work and I had my kids and all of those myriad things. And she said she was fine when you called her. These are the things that we say are signs and symptoms to look for when visiting and interacting with your loved ones. I literally tried to boil this down to something called come to your senses. So I've tried to indicate the use of our own senses to see, what do we see? What do we hear? What do we smell? And what do we feel when we're visiting with our beloved seniors, our friends, our neighbors, our parents, our grandparents, even our, sometimes it's even a little closer to home. Perhaps it's our own spouse, but we're starting to notice change. So I'm going to break it down. So what do we see? It could be the exterior of the home. Is it overgrown? Are the steps getting a little cracked, and are they perhaps in a state of disrepair? One of the biggest things that we notice, has the lawn suddenly become a jungle? Have they no longer been able to rake the leaves or remove the snow? These are all classic case scenarios of what you can see even just in a friend or a neighbor that might be the person down the street that you notice might not be doing quite as well as they may have in the past. When you do gain access to the home, do you notice that there's maybe little collections around the house? Is there a behemoth pile of mail that maybe they can't sift through and sort through anymore? This might be a sign of some executive functioning problems or some cognitive slip. Maybe they can no longer differentiate between what is a publisher's clearinghouse or what's actually a bill that they need to pay attention to and pay. We know we are all inundated with junk mail, but sometimes when we're a senior citizen, the trickery of the postal mail that we receive can really lead us to think that everything's important. One other thing to note when we're going into our loved ones' homes, have they created a little nest for themselves? Maybe it's a little section of the couch. Maybe it is their beloved throne, their recliner chair that they absolutely adore. Or sometimes there's a lot of people that just retire to bed and they start to form their own little domain around themselves in their bed or their chair. They literally have a proverbial glass of water that's always there. You're never sure, is it fresh? Is it not fresh? Does it ever actually go below that certain level? They could have, crackers and a few things of sustenance, but what are they actually eating? So really, we say you can gain so much information in the first 30 seconds of a visit with your loved one. Other things that we seem to note, we as professionals, when we go into a situation, we notice, are there suddenly towels or blankets that might be covering the couch or soft surfaces? We'll get to what that might be a sign of in a few moments. Do you start to notice things that might be wadded up or stuffed into corners? Perhaps wadded up and shoved in the trash can, maybe even in the corner. I'll share a few vignettes that really happened in my own life, my personal life, not my professional. We started to notice that my grandfather didn't need the orders of pull-ups and depends that he had chronically been asking us for. We were like, where are they? So there would be a few in the trash, in the waste paper basket in the bathroom, but we also started to notice that he equated them to his underwear. He was actually rinsing them out and stuffing them back in the drawer. So a little more on incontinence in a minute. Also, the physical person, your loved one, what do you see when you look at them? Has their physical appearance changed? Are they slightly unkempt? Is it a gentleman who always kept his hair nice and short, and now it's a little scraggly? It could be slightly unkempt, it could be disheveled, it could be downright unsavory at this point. One thing that we like to note, are there stains on your loved one's clothing? Is there something to note? Are they wearing appropriate clothing? Are they bundled up in layers upon layers and it's actually spring or summertime? Or maybe they're not wearing enough clothing. That's certainly interesting to walk in on. I know that many of us have in our professional lives, but a little awkward too when a son walks in on his mom in a few states of undress. So are they dressed appropriately for the temperature of the home or outside? And finally, one thing to note, are they wearing the same clothing over and over and over? We certainly notice, we serve a gentleman who lives in his wool sweaters, but we have to find a way to counteract that with him and for him when it's the heat and the humidity of August. So what to note when you do walk in and you see something that really sort of either takes you aback or freezes you in your tracks, perhaps it's time to consult with somebody who's not quite as close to the situation. I think a lot of times families and our loved ones, we're so close to a situation that we don't always see as it starts to evolve into a place of a place that could use a little bit of fine tuning and tweaking and maybe a little TLC. So in these types of situations, our first recourse is always to advise a call to the family doctor, primary care physician. It is no skin off their nose at the office or of the physician, him or herself, to call in a prescription for a consult, an evaluation and possible treatment with a home health. That could be a visiting nurse. It could be a visiting clinician, like a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, to do just a basic home safety eval. So again, it's a purpose-driven visit by a clinician. The great news is it's often covered by their primary insurance. So whether it's Medicare Part A for a visiting nurse or a Medicare Part B for a visiting clinician, like a Fox Rehab. Also, I think it's always important to note that a speech language pathologist is an invaluable tool. That clinical visit can really, really tap into any elements of delayed problem solving, cognitive slip, maybe a little bit of confusion, perhaps a little sundowning, changes in your loved one's abilities to rationalize and reason. So those are some of the first things to do when you walk in and you see something that might not be quite right. Now we're going to travel onto our other senses of what do you hear? What do you hear? This is a tough one to sit and actually listen. The tidbits that I would say to really truly key in on are reluctance and refusal. Is this person who may have otherwise been engaging, social, willing, maybe they weren't the life of the party, but they certainly were willing to attend graduations and birthday parties and holiday gatherings. Are they defaulting to a place of no thank you? When you sit down to have a conversation, which we certainly always encourage, sitting down face to face and keying into what somebody's nonverbal communication may be as well. Do they initiate conversation? Do they keep their answers to a minimum? Yes, no, I don't know. I don't know is a very, very real place that some people can be. And honestly, the less somebody talks and engages in conversation, the less opportunity they have to be wrong or incorrect or say the wrong thing or call a grandkid by the wrong name. Again, I think that we assume that people want to be included in a lot of social engagements, but for a lot of people, it's incredibly anxiety producing if they can't recall people's names, if they can't recall exactly how they know that person, the relationships. Again, I share a quick vignette that some of my grandparents ended up in long-term care settings, personal care, assisted living, skilled nursing facilities. And we as a family always thought it was the right thing to do to bring them home. But honestly, removing them from a very controlled environment and bringing them home at the holiday, there was wrapping paper flying and dogs running and kids and lights flashing and all of this stuff. And our sweet, kind, gentle grandmother reacted very negatively. You know, we were coming in to give her a hug and she didn't recognize us. And in reality, that triggered a real fight or flight response in her. And it, needless to say, didn't go well. We did not make for a very happy holiday in our house. Again, something to key into in what you hear during conversation. Are there repetitive negative statements? That could be a sign of a real emotional decline for somebody. When we talk about health and well-being, we're really looking at their physical health, their emotional health, and their cognitive health, all combined to make the well-being of a senior. Is the person all of a sudden having some irrational thoughts? Are they saying that they're being visited by people that they're really not being visited by? Things that just don't make sense. Pause for a minute and reflect. Myself as a clinician, I went in one day and I was chatting with this lady, and she was telling me the wildest stories about what was happening in her apartment after everybody in the retirement community had gone to bed. These crazy things were happening and people were coming down the hall and they were coming in and there was all this wild noise and commotion. I was like, what is going on here? With a little bit of probing, what came to light was this lady would catnap all throughout the day. She was also a news addict. She would watch the news all day long. So she would kind of fade in and out of sleep and reality. And what was happening was her reality was getting melded in with all of the news that she was watching. And she was also a huge fan of CSI. She would watch CSI, and Law and Order, Criminal Intent all day long. And all of those wild scenarios she was incorporating into her reality. So these are all things to listen for. And sometimes there's explanation and sometimes it requires a bit of further probing. Is the person becoming sad? Are they expressing anxiety? Are you watching them and they fidget and they seem uncomfortable? This is a time to circle the wagons. Can you get a family visitation agenda going that maybe somebody from the family or somebody who knows this person well can visit at different times of the day and find out exactly what is going on? And perhaps that informal support in and of itself is enough to maybe lift that person from the funk that they might be slipping into. I mean, let's be honest, we've all been in a funk because of isolation, et cetera, but I'm talking big picture stuff that happens as we age. So can you circle the wagons with some informal supports? Can you reach out to some of the things that might be there, like a senior center? If it's advanced, maybe even an adult day center. I will be candid that sometimes that feels scary to families, and or maybe you don't want to probe too far. Maybe you reach out to the local church, the synagogue, the local nursing school. There are myriad different resources that are out there. College kids need to do community service credits for their projected majors. There are so many wonderful things, but we have to cast a wide net and see what we might come up with. So we went through, what do we see? What do we hear? I'm going to be honest, guys, this one's a little uncomfortable, but it's, what do we smell? Thank heavens for masks. So let's go with that for now. Little pro tip. If you're going to visit somebody and it's going to be a little pungent, put just a little bit of perfume right here, rub it here. You're good to go for the duration of the visit. Plain and simple fact is senior citizens do have a diminished sense of smell and taste. Not related to COVID, just related to aging. So they honestly do not notice sometimes the odor in their own environment or even on their own person. Things to smell. Could it be the trash? Could it be spoiled food in the fridge? Please dig from behind, find and check those expiration dates. There could be incidental smells that you might find. Is there something that was burnt or is actively burning on the stovetop? You cannot deny the smell of burning plastic. And I cannot tell you how many people have put Tupperware on the stovetop. Again, it's muscle memory. They see something, they want to reheat it. They forget that plastic, not a good thing with the stovetop. Or even something as scary as a gas leak. They may not literally smell it. So little things like that. So what do you smell when you walk in? And honestly, you notice that one pretty quickly. The one that's a little sensitive would be the precarious odor of incontinence. It is strongly denied by most men and women too, but mostly the men. So how do you approach that? Because you can certainly smell it. It does soak into some soft surfaces. Honestly, sometimes it's the carpets that have a little bit of, incontinence. By incontinence, I mean bladder, lack of control, and bowel lack of control as well. The best thing that I do to ask people very straightforward, I say, this is going to be a little uncomfortable, but I totally appreciate and respect your honesty and candor in this. But are you able to hold your water? I think that's something people can relate to. Sometimes I get the head nod like, what? Or I often say, case example, first thing in the morning, you wake up, nature's calling. Are you able to answer the call in a timely fashion? I often say that it's our urgency to go versus our mobility to get there in time. So a lot of folks, it's a very, very real thing that they wake up in the morning. All of us, one of our first trips is to the restroom, and our bladder is full. We need to use the bathroom, but we also may have heart conditions. We may have vertigo. We have to get up, get to the side of the bed, wait for a minute, get our walker, get the wheelchair, whatever it is. Then we have to stand, allow our calibrations, and then head off to the bathroom. In the duration of time that takes, sometimes we've leaked, sometimes we've had a full tilt accident. So it is definitely something to ask people about, because it is notable and it's definitely something that we can smell. Then finally, there's that little body odor issue. Again, a lot of seniors do not bathe or shower on a daily or even weekly basis. The old sponge bath or bird bath, if you will, sometimes their bathroom is on a different level. And sometimes it's truly just very tricky and scary to take a full shower. There is so many varieties of assistance that you can get to have somebody come in and help your loved one with a shower, with bathing, dressing, grooming, toileting, all that good stuff. Certainly, it is a great time to, again, circle back to family first, physician second, and a formal support service like a non-medical home care agency. That could always be number 3. Feel. This is going to get a little elaborate, but when we feel, we think about what we physically feel, but there's also an emotional and a cognitive feeling too. Physically feeling, is the environment too hot? Is it too cold? Is it too drafty? Are they leaving windows open? Or is it the converse and it's just so daggone stuffy? You think, when was the last time this house saw a waft of fresh air? I will tell you, it is imperative for senior citizens to get sunshine. They don't have to go outside, but they do have to sit by a sunny window. Honestly, I work for a non-medical home care company, and we actually had a case where our client was a 97-year-old lady who was completely nocturnal. She was up all night, slept all day, fabulous. That was her thing, and we weren't going to change it at 97. We had a live-in caregiver that was with her. This live-in caregiver was in her late 40s. But what was happening was she had amended herself to the same hours. So there was not a lot of daylight that these ladies were getting. And the shades were drawn during the day because they were sleeping. What ended up happening was our 48-year-old caregiver had a heart attack because she herself was not getting the vitamin D from the sunlight. So I will tell you, throw open those shades and those blinds and get that sunlight. It is not just good for our emotional psyche, but it's literally good for our bones and our vitamin D and our circadian rhythms. I was really almost not going to come up with that one. Emotional. How does the space feel? Does it feel sad? Does it feel dreary? Does it feel quiet and lonely? Again, your physical space that you inhabit, whatever you call home, is equivalent to your soul. So how does it look? How does it feel? So again, how can you get a sense of what your loved one's day-to-day activities look like? Perhaps their space just feels a little off. Maybe that's a sign of some cognitive decline. Again, really simple things can be done to put some speed bumps in the way for our loved ones. What can we do? Can we look around in their space and really see, check for those financial bank statements piling up? Do you need to start talking and having deeper conversations about having somebody for some fiscal oversight, or having some checks and balances for the checks and the balances? My dear friend Dennis Mahoney is really going to touch on that in the next segment. And finally, I'm going to end. I've covered the senses of see, hear, feel, and see, hear, feel, smell. Forgive me. I'm going to end with one about taste, because you're going, oh gosh, gross. But in candor, this was happening. My paternal grandparents had a great big house where, you know, they always hosted the holiday gatherings. They had the most space. They loved doing it. And it was always great to have all the cousins and everybody gather there. We would have holiday meals, and it was a requisite that every holiday meal started with a sweet little fruit cup. You know, you've seen them all before. It has its own little fancy dish that it comes in. Well, there was one distinct Easter that we all showed up, and the fruit cups were out. And, you know, there was some other, you know, warning signs that our dear beloved elders were getting a little older, but we all looked down at our fruit cups, and I'll be darned, there were black olives mixed in with the fruit cup. Not so sure that's the most palatable for anybody, to be honest, but we did start to notice something is a little off here. So finally, I will say that my dear, delightful family did choke down the black olives in the fruit cocktail. We just pretended they were overripe maraschino cherries, and we got on with it. But I will tell you, come to your senses. Stop for a moment and think about what you are able to see, hear, smell, and feel when you're visiting with your loved ones. I appreciate your time. Thank you for listening to my silly stories. I am now going to toss it to my dear friend, Mr. Dennis Mahoney, who can really drill down into the financial, fiscal woes, some of the cognitive stuff that you may see in your loved ones. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mandy. It's very well done and very, very relevant to the world that we live in and our loved ones live in today. I am, as Jessica mentioned earlier, I am the owner and managing director of IKOR of Eastern Pennsylvania. We are a care management company in the business of providing life care management services with a particular focus on healthcare advocacy as well as financial advocacy services. Today, this evening, I'm going to focus more on the financial exploitation section within that, because that's one that is huge. It's growing, and it's very relevant to all of our loved ones on a daily basis. By definition, financial exploitation is a crime that deprives older adults of their resources and ultimately their independence. There's an estimated 330,000+ reported cases of elder financial exploitation in the US every year, and causing about $6.3 billion in estimated losses. Big numbers, but what does that really mean? Okay, let's figure out our world and who within our world could be a predator for financial exploitation of others. And the short answer is anyone. Could be anyone on this call, hopefully not, but nevertheless, you don't know. It could be family, it could be friends, it could be the caregivers that are invited into their home, provide much needed and valuable services, but also see the opportunity to take advantage of the situation and to find a way to enhance their life to the detriment of their clients. A question of who's the most vulnerable. Again, close to anyone, but normally those who suffer from dementia are obvious. And again, dementia is a scale. So it's the early dementia that Mandy mentioned earlier also slides up to more severe dementia. And so the severe dementia is pretty obvious. The less severe on the scale is not quite as obvious. So it's an important area to keep in mind and to pay attention to. Those that are socially isolated. Now, one of the themes of this being here this time of year is the holidays. The holidays have just passed, others still to come, but it's that season where people are seeing their families, seeing their loved ones, many times for the first time in quite a while. And Mandy talked about the obvious environmental signs of things that you see. But there are other things where the client just has remained isolated for a really long and extended period of time. And the phone calls are great. Occasional visits are great, but they don't necessarily tell the whole story. And particularly if you layer in COVID and the literal inability of many, many, many people to get out and to interact socially for going on 2 years now. It is, if you really step back and thought about it, it's an amazing and very troublesome situation, but that's the world that we're living in. Clients or individuals who get older, they suffer from functional limitations and an increased dependence on others and a loss of independence and the ability to take care of themselves. That is something that is a big deal for seniors. I don't know of one that embraces the loss of personal independence. And yet it's a fact, and sometimes they're aware of it, sometimes they're not. And then those are also suffering from chronic health conditions with the physical, cognitive, and emotional and social implications thereof. People get old, their health starts to deteriorate. In our world, where we do healthcare advocacy as well as financial, we see both. We see the manifestation of both. But it is normally in the world of financial management that the process really demonstrates itself more frequently and more often and earlier in the aging process. So it's something you say, well, I mean, I'm not feeling that well, but that's not really what the topic is. It's really the financial elements are the ones we can normally see and get a trigger to potential pitfalls that this patient individual might be going through. Some typical warning signs. Cognitive declines usually presents, as I just mentioned, with financial issues. Unusual activity on a person's bank account. And this is a key one where they have large, frequent, or unexplained withdrawals. We recently had a case where a client in this type of situation was going to the bank, taking out large sums of money, taking it home, putting it in a drawer, going back to the bank again, taking out large sums of money, taking it back and putting it in a different drawer. Fortunately, she had a friend from church, but a friend nevertheless who noticed this and was able to alert the authorities and were able to move forward and help this person out. But she thought her life was fine. She was doing great. Not so much. ATM withdrawals, we've had the case where the patient has never used an ATM card before in her life. More so with the seniors, but it happens. And okay, how did that ATM withdrawal take place? Well, I don't know. She still doesn't know how to do it. Transfers between bank accounts that the individual can't explain away. One that comes up fairly often is new best friends accompanying the client to the bank to help out, just to be a friend, just to be supportive. Hopefully that's the case, but it's something, again, to be alert to, something to be thinking about. When the bills come in, sudden non-sufficient fund activity, which had never been a problem before. Unpaid bills, Mandy had mentioned that. Suspicious signatures on checks or outright forgery. Again, who is interacting with this person when you're not there? If you're there, the family, the caregiver, the friend is there frequently, less of a chance of this happening. But if that isn't the case, the opportunity is certainly there and ripe for someone. Checks written as loans or gifts. And I have a client, 3 weeks ago, I went to see her and she said she had gotten a call from her grandson looking for a loan just to help him out, get him over the hump. Well, she was smart enough or alert enough to tell me about it. And then I said, well, do you have any grandchildren? And the answer was no. But nevertheless, that didn't stop the person from trying. We caught it that time. Don't know if we'll catch it the next time. Certainly hope so. But we talked at length about how she, as an individual, needs to really be alert to those types of things. I had another client who got a call from the president, the head of Facebook, a personal call from this person saying he had won $1 million. And all he had to do was send $400 to secure this $1 million. And this was on a Sunday morning. He calls me, he texts me to say, hey, guess what? And I said, now think about this for a minute. But he didn't. And that's just what we have to deal with. And the fact it's fortunate that someone was there to be alert and to say, no, this doesn't make any sense at all. Does not pass the smell test. A caretaker, relative, or friend who suddenly begins conducting financial transactions on behalf of the older person. That could be a really good thing. If you see clients who are not as agile, not as able to be out in the community, they may have a friend to go and actually perform some of these transactions for them. Maybe a caregiver, maybe a neighbor, whatever. That could be a really good thing. On the other hand, it could be a really bad thing as well. So it's just something to be aware of and to be cognizant of and to make sure that the situation smells right, basically. And then finally, a reluctance or embarrassment to discuss financial matters. No, they may not have done so in the past either, but if they're getting a challenge from you of what happened here, this type of thing. Again, they're losing their independence. They have pride. They don't want to give up their pride. They don't want to show weakness. So it's just something to be aware of, questions to ask, and just to be on top of the situation. And again, going back to the earlier point of isolation and vulnerability, that's what we're dealing with here. If they're living in a big, happy family, you're going to have some of these issues anyway, but more often than not, and this is what we have to deal with. Other warning signs, and Mandy did a good job touching on those personal issues like odor, personal hygiene, increased antisocial behavior. Everyone gets a little more grumpy as they get older, I think, but nevertheless, the increased when it gets antisocial behavior, that's when it's a trigger to pay attention to it. And organizational issues can be small things like not replacing burnt out light bulbs, but also losing important things like keys, wallets, phone. They forget important things like appointments, birth year, names, various things like that. These are all warning signs that the person needs to be aware of. And then finally, steps to take to prevent financial abuse. And the first one is to be involved. If you have a loved one, if you have someone that you're close to, be involved. Pay attention to it, ask sometimes challenging questions, but questions that are really important, pardon me, to the welfare of that person, whether they like to hear it or not. Designate a trusted person as financial power of attorney. I'm sure all of you who have been involved know that money does weird things to people. Money does weird things to family members. And it's just something to be aware of, where anyone who's been in this business for a while has a list of stories of financial abuse by family members who were entrusted to take care of the client, who were entrusted to work on their behalf. And that didn't happen. So that's just something to all be aware of. And I think important, staying in touch with older loved ones, that is consistent with being involved. But it's like, oh, they're fine. You know, I haven't heard from them in a while. They're fine. I called her 3 weeks ago just to check in. She's fine. Particularly these days, particularly with the isolation of the pandemic. This is more and more important. And it's just an obligation that we all assume on behalf of our loved ones that we need to live up to and to follow through on. And then also the final point is to get to know your loved ones' caregivers. Many of them have caregivers who come into the home a couple of hours a day, a couple of days a week, whatever the case might be. But get to know them, get to know who they are, where they're from. Hopefully they come from a reputable agency. Sometimes it's a personal hire by the individual or somebody else, and it doesn't come with that authentication of the worker in place. They're trying to save a few bucks. The risk is significantly higher that won't be a good outcome. And that's really the points that I wanted to make on it. We've identified here a situation from the environmental thing, looking from some of the telltale signs on the financial exploitation side. And now I'm going to flip it to Dianne Magee, who is going to answer the now what part of it. Dianne.
Thank you very much, Dennis. And thanks to Jessica for introducing us. I'm Dianne Magee. I am an estate and elder law attorney practicing principally in Central and Upper Bucks counties. So what if you've taken the advice that's been given generously tonight by Mandy and Dennis, and it's just not working? And let me add a point to what Mandy said about smells. Unfortunately, in my many years of practicing law, more than 38 years, I've had occasions where I've had to go into houses where dead bodies have been deteriorating, which is a really horrific smell. And the best advice I ever got from a police officer is to put a little bit of that Vicks Vapo Rub, which we used to use as kids. Put that under your nose, and it does do a really good job of knocking out and letting you avoid any particularly awful smells. But what if things are really going to hell in a handbag quickly, even if you've followed good advice? I think that I was chosen in particular to answer this question, not just because my email address is @grimlaw.com, which makes you think that I do deal with grim situations all the time, but also because, as Jessica mentioned, for almost 20 years, I did serve as the solicitor or the attorney for the Bucks County Area Agency on Aging, which is the local agency here in Bucks County charged with the duty of serving and protecting any adult in the county age 60 and older. And so, in case you're not in Bucks County, every county in the Commonwealth either has or shares its own area agency on aging, which we informally call the AAA. Not the people that'll come pick you up and repair your car, but that will help you with older adults. And all those agencies work under the auspices of the umbrella of the State Department of Aging here in Pennsylvania. So if your loved one is age 60 or older and just needs a little help, maybe some housekeeping, maybe some bookkeeping, Meals on Wheels, help getting PACE or PACE-Net, which is the discount drug coverage available to low-income seniors in Pennsylvania, maybe help with Medicare, signing up or having questions about it, call the general number for the Bucks County Area Agency on Aging, which is 267-880-5700. And now I'm going to get to your slide, which says, if, however, the situation is more serious and that you believe that your loved one, again, who's over 60 or older, is being financially exploited, physically abused, abandoned, or neglected, and frequently that neglect is self-neglect, then call the hotline, the Protective Services hotline of your local county area agency on aging to make a report of need for protective services. We see here the Bucks County Area Agency on Aging Protective Services hotline number is 1-800-243-3767. And that hotline, so you know, is available 24 hours per day, 7 days per week. So call anytime. And I will tell you, nothing that you can possibly say in that call will be shocking to the social worker who's on the other end of the line. They've heard it all. I can just give you a sampling of a few of the things that I witnessed during my tenure during the agency's legal work. And some of these horrendous conditions that are existing in what seems to be a fairly affluent community may be surprising to you, but again, the agency has seen it all, and these things do exist here in Bucks County, I'm sure in the neighboring counties too, often behind closed doors. So prime examples would be physical condition. As mentioned before, we'd see all too often open, oozing, even maggot-filled wounds on older adults who then would adamantly refuse to see a medical provider. Very, very common. The house is in horrendous condition. The house is uninhabitable or dangerous. We had a case where the woman's kitchen in her townhouse was completely filled up with plastic bags. House is hoarded with all kinds of junk, magazines, newspapers, books, things that produce fires and that would burn quickly. Very, very dangerous fire hazards. Hoarded with only narrow pathways where you couldn't get out in the case of a fire either, where you could just barely walk through the house at all. Lots of cases where, unfortunately, the residents lacks basic utilities, such as running water, and we'd see collections of waste out in the yard or collected in the house in places. The infestation of insects, not just bed bugs, all other kinds of insects and rodents. We had a case where a gentleman in a very high income community was actually sleeping in a bed, the mattress of which contained rat nests, and he wasn't aware of it. More frequently in the last decade, I'd say we've seen a lot of animal hoarding cases where the animals are in extremely poor condition too. And we do work cooperatively with the Bucks County SPCA to place the animals while the Area Agency on Aging takes care of the older adult. We know that no one wants to leave their home or lose their independence. Like I said, in my many years of practicing law, it's been extremely rare for me to have someone voluntarily sign up to go to a nursing home, but sometimes there's just no other choice. Another thing, as alluded to by Dennis, that the Area Agency on Aging sees a lot is the financial exploitation. Thousands of dollars in money orders, for example, being sent overseas to win that always elusive prize. People being victimized by the grandparents scam, where they think that a loving family member is in trouble and has called them seeking to be bailed out. Oftentimes, the funds can't be recovered, but the Area Agency on Aging does work with the Consumer Protection Bureau to do their best to at least stop the victimization and try to make the individual whole. It's important to know in making a call for protective services to the Area Agency hotline that the identity of the individual who makes the report of need is always under the law confidential. That identity cannot be released to anyone outside of the agency, or it's a crime for that information to be released. So no one will ever know that you're the one who made the report. Once a report is made, the Area Agency on Aging must investigate the report within 72 hours of the receipt. And how does it do that? It's been harder to do that, and particularly in the first few months of COVID when home visits were not allowed. And so they had to try to make virtual visits or just telephone contact, which of course is not as good and really doesn't do the job. But the way the agency typically works is to make an unannounced home visit by a social worker, sometimes accompanied by a nurse, to meet with the older adult alone and to interview the older adult alone. If that contact is refused, say no one comes to the door, or someone comes to the door, whether it's the older adult or someone else who's living there and slams the door shut, doesn't allow the agency in, or the agency worker gets in, but is not allowed to meet privately with the older adult, then the agency will go to court to seek an involuntary intervention order to get access to the older adult, to seek that access order. And then the agency will come back with the order with the police, and if necessary, entry into the home will then be forced with the assistance of the police. Also know the Area Agency on Aging under the Older Adult Protective Services Act has the right to access the older adult's financial records from banks, from investment houses without the older adult's knowledge or permission. And that's frequently done. If after undertaking an investigation, the agency determines that the report of need is substantiated, that the older adult is in need of protective services and without them will suffer imminent physical injury or death, then the agency will file for involuntary protective services with the court. The forms of that involuntary intervention might include transportation to an emergency room or a hospital, placement into a long-term care facility, the freezing of assets. The agency will file a petition for temporary relief, first of all, that lasts for 72 hours, and then can request a hearing for a permanent order, granting permanent relief without a further review hearing, although further review hearings can be requested. Apart from the Area Agency on Aging, another type of relief that can be sought through the courts for an older adult who has lost cognitive abilities to care for themselves, to make reasonable decisions for themselves, is guardianships. And that's filing a petition with the Bucks County Orphans Court or the Orphans Court in your county to have the individual declared to be incapacitated, unable to make reasonable or responsible decisions about themselves, about their care, about their finances, and to have a guardian appointed for the individual, the incapacitated individual. Types of guardianships can be a guardian of the estate to handle all the financial affairs, a guardian of the person to make medical decisions, to make residential decisions. The guardian can be plenary, which means controlling all decision-making, or limited, only doing certain things that the older adult is determined not to be able to do. Again, on an emergency basis, a temporary order, a short-term order can be sought, and then followed up by a regular permanent order. To have an individual declared incapacitated, which is the first requirement in having a guardian appointed, a written medical decision from a doctor must be obtained stating that the older adult cannot make and communicate responsible decisions about herself, her care, and or her finances. That report is necessary as evidence or the action won't go anywhere. So it's important to have a doctor's cooperation at the very beginning when a guardianship is sought. The downsides of guardianship are, first of all, incredibly emotionally traumatic, really, for everyone involved. I always say, if you don't have to go to court, you really don't want to do that, and especially in a guardianship. If the individual who's declared to be incapacitated has any understanding of the proceeding, there is almost nothing worse you can do to someone than take away their ability to make their own decisions. It's also an expensive process. Unfortunately, those attorneys charge a lot. It's time consuming, and for the guardian, it becomes a permanent job, requiring annual reporting to the court and court oversight. And it's a thankless job. It's really tough, and I give credit to the people who do that. The bottom line, the Bucks County Area Agency on Aging is a tremendous resource to you. Its social workers and nurses are experienced, professional, dedicated, tireless, and incredibly caring people. Just the best people that I will say I've ever had the privilege and opportunity to work with. They will help you. So if a family member is in need, needs help, or really needs protective services, don't hesitate to call your local area agency on aging for help. And that's my presentation. And now I'll turn it back over to Jessica for any questions and for the final wrap up. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Dianne and Dennis and Mandy. Really appreciated your insights and feel like you armed us with a lot of information to help on this really important topic. Before we close out, I wanted to mention a few upcoming seminars that we have, many of them legal in nature, but our next one will be in March actually there's one in February as well, about managed care for your loved ones. And then there'll be another one in March about protecting assets. And then we'll move on to end of life planning in April, trust planning in May, and estate administration, or what to do when someone passes away, in June. So we hope that you'll come back and join us for one of these upcoming webinars. Take care and thank you for your time. Also, please consider visiting our website to learn more about our speakers and other events. Thank you.